Welcome back to another student physical therapist video. My name is Jim Hefner. I'm a physical therapist in Boulder, Colorado. I have my own private practice and I try to integrate the concepts of pain science and movement biomechanics. And I think both of those are extremely important. Pain science takes this top-down approach where the cortex really influences how we interpret pain, but we need to understand the biomechanical principles so we can understand the sensory input portion of pain as well. And in this video, I'm going to help you integrate those things by understanding different movement fundamentals and training and how the human body works on a holistic level where everything connects with everything else. So some movement fundamentals. There is no best posture, but some postures are stronger than others. The reason there's no best posture is that if I stand in this perfect military posture all day, I'm still going to develop tightness and weakness in certain areas because I'm just in one position. Our body craves movement and we crave being in a variety of positions. So there's no best posture, but some positions are stronger than other. And that the strong position would be core in, chest back, head up on top of the body. That allows for ideal mobility and stability. So we need to move a lot, but we also need to identify that some positions are very good just from a stacked alignment of the body. Next, there's no bad movements, but some movements are less stable than other. So if we take uncontrolled knee valgus, I want the knee to be able to go into that position where the femur can go into internal rotation, but collapsing into femoral internal rotation and foot pronation takes away from arch stability. It takes away from glute support. It challenges the pressure dispersion up through the SI joints. So there's no bad movements. We need to be able to do those things so our body has information about it, but we can't hang out in those all day, especially under repetitive high loads, because it's just less stable. I mean, you need to know that there's more stable positions than that. So identifying movement efficiency is key. And we're going to get into that movement efficiency piece when we get into the training portion. But knowing that there's a most efficient position of the body that leverages our joint position, that leverages the natural springs and levers in our body is extremely important. The most efficient strategy is going to be one that minimizes energy expenditure because ultimately our bodies are always trying to save and conserve energy. So we need to minimize energy expenditure and then also minimize the physical stresses through the tissue. When things are stacked, when we're using the arch of our foot, when we're using the natural loading mechanisms of the meniscus, when we're not overstraining our ligaments, that is going to put less physical stress on the body, which is less energy expenditure for the body. Joints and muscles function best when their length-tension relationship is maintained. Uh, to me, the clearest example of that is when someone goes down into a squat and they hold kind of the perfect squat position. The reason that's a great squat position is because it keeps the length-tension relationship of our glutes and our hamstrings in relation to our quads. If you go too deep into a squat and you see that butt wink position, we completely take away the length to tension relationship of our glutes and our hamstrings. And then all the stress then goes to the lower back. Yes, the lower back can handle it, but maintaining the muscle length tension relationship, when we can maintain tension in the muscular system, then we don't load our joint system as much, or our skeletal system. So maintaining length tension relationship is huge, and that's going to help our muscles and our joints function at their optimal level. When a joint remains centered, the muscles surrounding the joint can offer maximal stability. Now, there's going to be times where our joints are not centered, and that's okay too. But when we are in when I'm in a good posture position, the reason that's good is that I can move my shoulder through full range of motion. If I'm slouched here, I'm going to put myself in a mechanical impingement of the shoulder, and that decreases movement option or decreases movement degrees of freedom. What I strive for is what I call a movement sphere of resiliency. And a larger range of controlled motion is a greater sphere of resiliency, meaning that if I'm in a good postural position, I can handle stresses throughout all different ranges, but I want to make sure that my system is set up for those positions. And the better that I can move my joints through all ranges of motion, and I can control that, the larger the sphere of resiliency is going to be. And it's all about your ability to be able to maintain muscle tension and to minimize the physical stressors that go through our tissues. And that takes controlled mobility or strength through a large range of motion. If we flip the equation a little bit, we are built for efficiency. So the habitual patterns and postures that we put ourselves in throughout the day are going to be the positions that our body then adapts to over time. So if I always hang out in a slouched forward head, rounded shoulder position, it's not going to inherently cause pain. But if I'm doing that and I'm under stress, and then I'm also trying to do a lot of overhead lifting, this position all day long is going to be less efficient for getting up overhead into other positions. So while one position is not bad, if we hang out in one position, our body becomes more efficient. It becomes more metabolically adapted to those positions, which is just going to minimize our efficiency in other areas. So what we need to do, the solution is a diverse movement and training routine that incorporates strong movement principles, which we're going to get into in a second, but then also resiliency with movement outside one's comfort zones. The example of me for that is I've been doing jujitsu for about a year now, and in that you're doing a lot of bridging positions for the hips where you're pushing up and out, and that you're doing that from different knee angles where your knee needs to be, one knee is going to be maybe in more femoral internal rotation, the other one's an external rotation. Your feet are planted, and that creates different torsional stresses across the knee. When I started out, I could feel my knees were not strong, almost like my ligaments were taking, my MCL and LCL would take on strain in different ways. And the more I practiced and the more I got strong in those positions, the more resilient I became outside of that comfort zone. So initially, at the beginning, I had only trained bridges in kind of that neutral upright position. Now I can bridge in a variety of different ways, and my hamstrings can tolerate it. My knees feel a lot stronger in that position. And it's because I've strengthened the hamstrings not only in their neutral alignment, but in a variety of different positions. That becomes very sport specific. So maybe that's less necessary uh, for a runner who's trying to generate a lot of sagittal plane power, but it's more important than from someone who's doing a lot of dynamic type of movements. Now, I think there is this sort of balance of where does injury prevention fall into that, and being able to move in a variety of ways is really the key to injury prevention. So we want to create a diverse movement and training routine that challenges your body in a variety of motions so you become resilient across a bigger sphere, a bigger pattern of movement. So with movement training, we got to go principles first. And that means I want to train movement patterns and not individual muscles. If you've seen other videos from me, you know that I'm huge on the 8 fundamental movement patterns. And that's going to be our squat, our lunge, and our hip hinge. So squat, lunge, and deadlift, essentially. Then a push, pull, carry, twist or rotate, and then being an efficient mover with walking or locomotion. We need to train those movement patterns because we move in very synergistic ways. After we learn to train movement patterns, then we can start training individual muscles. And what that means is I want to train a strong pulling or pressing type of pattern before I train the biceps a ton, because I want to make sure that as I'm training my bicep, my shoulder, my elbow, my thoracic position can tolerate those positions. So principles first is training patterns, not individual muscles. I want to train stability and joint integrity before flexibility and joint mobility. What that means is doing isometric positions like planks, hollow body holds, um, rotator cuff stability from a strong postural position, um, single leg balance, single leg RDLs. Those things that train stability through a range of motion is going to be more important than leveraging flexibility right away. We need to be able to control one position before we can think about controlling all the positions of that joint. Train core strength and mobility before extremity strength. Our core position is going to be our center of mass, our center of balance. It's where the core area coordinates movement throughout the rest of the body. We need to be strong from our core lumbopelvic position because everything else is the foundation from there. If I slouch through my low back, that's going to slouch through my thoracic spine and change how my cervical spine can function. From here, if I rotate, my upper trap gets pulled forward and it blocks cervical rotation. The more my core is upright, the more my chest is going to be upright, and then I can take my neck through a full mobility. Other movement training principles. We need to go slow before we can go fast. One of my favorite quotes from Tom Myers and Anatomy Trains is that just because you can do something fast doesn't mean you can do something slowly. When we train something slowly, we give our body, especially on a pain prevention standpoint, going slowly teaches your body the mechanoreceptors, the nociceptors, all of the pressure sensors in our joints and our muscles can then kick on and we can get feedback about each individual position. So training slow allows for proper form to occur without blowing past movements or ranges that you can't control. Also, going slowly engages all the tissue and gives you time to feel where areas are high or low tone. I think about this when someone's doing a single leg RDL, they go down into that movement and you see one side of the pelvis just tip up because they're not able to control their hamstrings and glutes in that position. If you train it slowly and you use assistance, not resistance initially, you use assistance where you use a TRX or a door frame or two foam rollers for hand support, you can control the pelvis position, controlling how the hamstrings work. But that requires you to go slow. It requires you to take a step back. Controlled variability is the other part of movement training that's extremely important. Movement variability allows for constant challenge, adaptation, and neural excitement. And when you challenge your nervous system and you challenge it to adapt, giving yourself movement variability is going to be the key to understanding how your body can tolerate a variety of positions. And this teaches you to be a movement problem solver. And I love that phrase because oftentimes an injury happens because when you put your tissues under stress or strain, if they can't handle a certain position, then the tissue doesn't know how to respond. But if you challenge your body in a variety of ways, if you challenge it to adapt to different positions and you teach your nervous system what each position feels like, then you're going to be a good movement problem solver. And what that does is it reduces overload syndromes. It reduces the constant stress that's put on a single tissue because you can start to feel when one area is getting overloaded and you have the resiliency or the ability to adapt to a different position. I probably hit on these pieces a little bit already through the prior slide, but the goal of a movement training program or of physical therapy, of physical training should be sensory motor refinement. And what that means is by controlling a wide variety of positions, that teaches the body how to adapt to a wide variety of stresses and strains on the tissue. That's a combination of the afferent input from the nervous system and the efferent input that the efferent muscle response that's in return. And when that is good, when that response is sharp, then when you're on a trail run and you drop into some knee valgus or your ankle turns into an everted position, you can quickly bounce out of that position because your tissues know that say, okay, I'm taking on too much strain there. The sensory motor system is refined and you can quickly adapt to that. It's when someone doesn't have that sensory motor refinement that the ankle doesn't know what to do or the hip doesn't know how to respond to it that puts too much stress or strain to the tissue and then the ligament tears. So we need to pay attention to sensing overdoing. More reps is not always better. More reps at some point after your form and your efficiency of the pattern is good. But initially, we need to pay attention to sensing and feeling what the body is doing before just doing more and more reps on top of that. What this does is, and this gets into the maybe less Western medical approach, but sensory integration offers mind-body integration where the mind knows what the body's doing and the body knows what the mind's doing. So there's this back and forth dialogue that's happening that makes sure that you can quickly adapt to different postures and positions. Um, Augmented rest. So less effort is usually better initially because it gives your body time to respond to fatigue. Between reps and sets, your muscles can adapt to certain positions without getting overloaded where you default to certain patterns. Um, This is a tricky one in rehab standpoints because we're always just kind of running through a chain of exercises. But giving adequate rest gives the body time to one, learn what they just did, and then two, rest enough so that you can be ready for your next set or your next series of repetitions. Incorporating variability and diversity, different environments, different task demands, doing things that when you're at a different level of arousal are all important for movement diversity from a variability standpoint. Oftentimes, people will ask me, should I come in before or after I work out? And I say, I want to see you in both of those situations because life is both of those situations. So when someone comes in post workout, they're going to be at a different emotional and arousal level than they would if they came in after their or before their workout. So I want to see people in both ways because I want to know how their joints and their position is showing up when they're fatigued, when they are had a stressful day at work throughout a variety of different environments. And another key with that is I'm always trying to create reactionary and real life movement tests. So that's why another reason I test those 8 fundamental movement patterns is because I want to see one, how do they perform those movements? And then also those movements are going to be the real life tests that they need to do throughout their daily life. Fundamental movement skills before heavy training. We need to develop form and movement literacy before we can progress to speed and power. So we need to train kind of from the ground up. I think about this as an inverted pyramid of we need to train stability first, then we can start adding a layer of mobility on top of that stability. Then we can start adding strength through that range of motion. And then last is where we get into our athletic movements, our speed and our power. So before we can load something under a quick velocity, we need to teach the body how to load slowly and controlled. So we need to teach that movement literacy literally from the ground up. Motor skill development teaches the body how to coordinate, sync, recruit, and fire all the muscles. If you're going for speed and power right away, or not, let's say if we're doing a skater movement side to side, and as you jump over to one side to then push back off the other way, if the glutes and the hamstrings or the lateral chain muscles don't know how to hold single leg stability, then we're just gonna drop into the outer hip, probably turn into femoral internal rotation. We're going to lose a lot of the all of the muscles firing together for those movements. Strength training and flexibility should go hand in hand. So after we've trained a joint position, then we need to start teaching that muscle how to be flexible through a bigger range of motion. So flexibility training is important because it activates the body's receptors, such as the proprioceptors and mechanoreceptors. We cannot neglect the importance of being flexible, but we need to be strong through that whole range of motion. So when we train the proprioceptors and mechanoreceptors, those receptors are important for maintaining joint stability and body awareness. So if we build self-awareness of a movement, then we're more likely to have movement options or a better diversity of movement where we can get out of a position that maybe previously would have overloaded joints or overloaded tissues. The last part is training the connective tissue is the key to injury prevention. And what I mean by that is we need to train the patterns of movement. So if I'm doing a big bandit or cable fly machine, I need to be able to control the strong position where the chest is upright. I'm leveraging the entire range of motion of the pec all the way down to the biceps and then into the forearm and hand. Because then as I go back into that motion, I'm able to hold a strong position there versus letting the arm turn into internal rotation. The more I can control that position, I'm teaching the connective tissue. So the not only the ligaments, but the epimysium, the perimysium, the layers of the muscle that connect together through chains of movement. When you can control entire chains of motion, controlling the connective tissue or fascial response, then that is going to be the key to how we prevent injuries because we can take these functional movement patterns and train them through big ranges of motion. I always say that training the muscular system adds functional capacity to a balanced body. So we need to have a balanced body first, and then we can dynamically train the muscular system on top of that. A few more things. I think about this as we need to train both open and closed kinetic chain movement. So we need to teach the body how to do things in a variety of different ways. We need to analyze multiple planes of movement and ensure that people can move in triplanar patterns. Going back to the skater example, being able to drop into one side where I can the glute is a hip extender, abductor, and external rotator. So being able to load into a position that takes you into the opposite position, so flexion, adduction, and a little bit of internal rotation, gives the glute power to push off and perform this triplanar action. We need to teach the core how to stabilize in a variety of different ways, integrating everything from the subtalar joint to the knee to the hip to the thoracic spine. And when we can leverage that chain of subtalar joint, knee, hip, thoracic, then that's what I call a truly functional position because we're able to control these main centers of mobility throughout the body. These things will naturally challenge our vestibular, visual, and proprioceptive centers. And then as you get more specific with someone's goals, that's where we can tailor the specificity of their program and their training towards that individual's lifestyle and their whatever activity levels they're doing. Final two slides here. The functional progressions that I look at are training bilateral before unilateral. So making sure that they can control a bigger base of support before we narrow their base of support. Stable before unstable. So if I'm working on someone's lunge position, I'm going to start them out just in a neutral lunge stance, probably double hip width apart or so on a stable surface before I incorporate some sort of unstable medium. Partial range of motion before full range of motion. The larger we get into more ranges of motion, the more stability and the more synergistic patterns of movement is required. So I want to start with more of an isometric joint position, then work into isotonic and bigger ranges of motion. Unloaded before loaded, or I would even say assistance before resistance, making sure that they can control the movement pattern before we add load onto that pattern. Slow before fast, and then simple before complex. On a load progression standpoint, so we just talked about unloaded before loaded, but from load progression, we want to go generic, so teaching them the general patterns before we go specific. Lying or sitting before standing. What I mean by that is give them more base of support, more control before we go into more dynamic and less stable. Unisegmental before multisegmental, uniplanar before and one-dimensional before we go into three-dimensional, slow before fast, stable before unstable. Give them the entire visual system, so don't take away any visual cues before we add in visual deprivation. An example of that would be when you see high levels of Steph Curry videos training with the NBA basketball, he will often do things where he has a blinder on his face or someone's blocking his visual system. And that's at the highest level where uh, he didn't start off shooting three-pointers without looking at the rim, but eventually we added on he added on these layers where he needs to be able to shoot a basket with hardly having he just needs to know where the hoop is while taking away all of the visual systems associated with it. Bilateral before unilateral, simultaneous before alternating, so working one pattern before working a variety of different patterns, and then single tasking before multitasking. You can see from a functional progression to the load progression, there's so much crossover between these things. But if you start thinking about this from a movement training standpoint, from a load training standpoint, that teaches the body how to first control position and then become more adaptive and resilient. All right, that was a ton of information, but that is how I view with some of the fundamental movement principles of movement and then how to train or how to make someone more dynamic. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you have questions, reach out at studentphysicaltherapist@gmail.com. You can send me an email if you want to see more information like this or more specifics. Always reach out and then we can make that happen. So thanks. Have a great day.